All right, now let's look very briefly at Aristotle's account of practical wisdom. It's not going to be our main focus. We're going to actually be focusing more on wisdom. But Aristotle's theory of practical wisdom has been very influential. It's very important. There's a lot written about it, but we're going to give a kind of just a very quick run through it. So it's the virtue of the deliberative part of the soul. And Aristotle's kind of inroad for thinking about practical wisdom is to pick up on that fact. So what he says is that practical wisdom, well, what is it, or who do we credit with it? We credit those people who are excellent at deliberating, right? And he seems to think that by unpacking the notion of what it is to be excellent at deliberating, that's how we're going to figure out what practical wisdom is, right? And so excellent at deliberating, as we were talking about deliberating in a previous video. Deliberating is kind of figuring out what to do when life presents you with some kind of tricky situation, and you can go one way, you go another way, or you don't even know which way to go. Figuring out what you ought to do and what it's appropriate to do, and not just figuring out some old solution, but figuring out kind of the right solution, or the appropriate, the correct solution, right? That's being good at deliberating, good at figuring out how to act and what to do. And Aristotle says there are kind of two distinct components to being excellent at deliberating, to practical wisdom. So you can think of this as practical wisdom doing two different things. In the first place, it makes one good at means end reasoning. Means end reasoning is the kind of reasoning that we engage in when we are figuring out how to achieve some end that we have, right? So if I think to myself, boy, I'd really like to I don't know, get a job as a computer programmer. I don't know. That's my end. If I were good at means end reasoning, I would be able to figure out what the necessary steps are to achieve that end, right? That's being good at means end reasoning. So, okay, I want to become a computer programmer. They're just the coolest people I know, and that's what I want to be. Okay, fine. Well, first I got to go, I wouldn't even know. I got to go get another BA, I guess, or BS in computer programming. And then I got to go maybe get a master's degree, and maybe I got to go get a job and blah, 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 right? There are these various steps you take to achieve that end. The kind of thinking and planning and deliberating that you're engaging in when you're figuring out how exactly to achieve some given end, that's means end reasoning. And to be good at deliberating, to be excellent at deliberating, excellent at figuring out what to do, you're going to be good at that kind of thing. You're going to know what the steps are to take to achieve some given end, right? You're going to be able to figure that out and figure it out well. And the means that you decide upon, that you think about, and yeah, this is how to do it, those are going to be the right means. You're going to be right about it, that yeah, you should kind of go through those steps, and that's how you'll achieve that end. Somebody who's good at deliberating, who has practical wisdom, will be able to hit upon the right means for achieving some given end, right? That's what Aristotle was saying in the first place. Not everybody's like that. Some people have ends set for themselves, and they think, oh, I'll do it this, and then they come up with some plan and it doesn't work at all, right? That's not excellence at deliberating. You wouldn't go ask somebody like that for advice about how to get something done, right? Because they're not very good at deliberating. They don't have this means end reasoning. Okay, so that's one thing that practical wisdom does for us. One thing. Second thing it does, and we actually already saw something, we saw Aristotle kind of foreshadowing this back in book 2, chapter 6. Practical wisdom discerns where the mean is. It figures out what the mean is, in other words. When we were talking about Aristotle's doctrine of the mean, if you recall the doctrine of the mean claims that the character virtues dispose one to hit the mean in passion and action? Well, one of the questions we talked about is, well, how do you know where the mean in passion and action is? Because a point that Aristotle makes is that there's no general rule for figuring that out. There's not just some general rule, always charge into battle, right? And that's what courage requires. No, that's not true. Sometimes courage, in fact, requires retreating from battle, Aristotle would think, or Aristotle thinks. Would think, were he alive, I guess. There's no general rule. Well, so how do you figure out where it is? And there's no general rule because the particularities of the situation, right? That determines what it's appropriate to do. And, the particularities of a situation, they're just different. Situations are different. And so in one context, to use an earlier example, right? In one context, giving $50 might be appropriate. And in a different context, that very same action might be inappropriate. Practical wisdom is what tells you what the mean is. Practical wisdom is a kind of perceptive awareness. It's an ability to size up a situation, to discern what all the relevant particular features of that situation are, and then in light of those particularities, figure out what it would be appropriate to do, right? That's what practical wisdom does. It's this kind of perceptive awareness that keys us in to what it's appropriate to do. And it does that by paying attention to the particularities of a situation, right? This is the other part of what it is to be excellent at deliberating. It's being able to see, in light of all the particularities of a situation, what it's appropriate to do, whether or not it's appropriate to be angry, and if so, how much anger is appropriate, whether or not generosity requires giving money, and if so, how much, and so on for the other virtues. Practical wisdom discerns where the mean is. It figures out where the mean is. And so there's a very tight relationship, according to Aristotle, between practical wisdom and the moral virtues. According to Aristotle, they go hand in hand. Anybody who actually has the moral virtues also has practical wisdom. And anybody who has practical wisdom also has the moral virtues. There's an extended argument he gives for that. We haven't read it. We're not going to look at it. That thesis is called the unity of the virtues. Practical wisdom and the moral virtues come as a joint deal, as a joint package. That's the unity of the virtues. It's something Aristotle thinks, but we're not going to get into it. For our purposes, all that really matters is that practical wisdom discerns where the mean is. That's how you figure out where the mean is. You don't need some general rule or principle. You need a kind of practical wisdom, right? Perceptive awareness of the particularities of situation and a knowledge of what to do in light of those particularities. And so here's an example, right? Aristotle often thinks of, the way we can figure out, as I was saying at the beginning, the way we can figure out practical wisdom is by looking at those people to whom we credit it. Who do we credit with practical wisdom? And another way to think about it, who do we credit with practical wisdom? Well, it's the people you'd go ask for advice. You don't go ask an 8-year-old for advice about pretty much anything. Maybe, I don't know what 8-year-olds know, but, maybe about how to beat a video game or something. I don't know. But because they don't have practical wisdom. To acquire practical wisdom, Aristotle doesn't go into detail, by the way, about how exactly you acquire practical wisdom, not like he does with the moral virtues. But to acquire practical wisdom, it's one thing he suggests is you need experience, and lots of it. And that seems right. To hone this perceptive awareness of what's relevant and what's not, which particularities of the situation are relevant and what their relevance amounts to, right? That just takes life experience. And so there are certain people that we credit with practical wisdom. They're the people that you'd go ask for advice, right? You're in some situation, I don't know what to do. You go ask certain people. And Aristotle would say, when you look at those people, when you start trying to think about reflecting upon why you would ask them, Aristotle would want to say, well, it's because in the first place, they're gonna, if you really trust them and you really think that they are going to give you good advice, they're probably going to be able to say, well, you should, think about doing this and then that. They're going to be able to kind of lay out the means for achieving your end. And so in the illustration I give right there, right, you can see that. And well, first you should blah, 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 and then you need to do this, and then you need to da, 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 right? That's kind of laying out the means for achieving your end in some particular situation. And Aristotle's idea for someone who's really good at deliberating, excellent at deliberating, their ends are not just going to be any old random ends. Their ends are, what he's primarily concerned with, their ends are going to be virtue, doing the virtuous thing. And look, they know where the mean is. They know what it's appropriate to do. They know what the appropriate action or feeling is for any given situation, right? And so they can lay out the means for you, right? First you should, then finally you ought to. And moreover, they know that those means are going to be conducive to or constitute doing the virtuous thing, because they know what the virtuous thing to do in your situation is, right? That's practical wisdom. That's excellence at deliberating. That's being good at figuring out how to behave, how to act, knowing what it's appropriate to do. So Aristotle would say somebody like that, the person you'd go ask advice, kind of, not just any old advice, like how to comb your hair if you had hair, or whatever. I don't know. People ask advice about that, but like kind of substantive life advice about big decisions and so on. That's the kind of advice we're thinking of here. The people that you go ask for that kind of advice, those are the people that have practical wisdom, that are excellent at deliberating. And it's precisely because they are excellent at deliberating, that they have practical wisdom, that you go and ask them. That's Aristotle's view, and that's what practical wisdom kind of amounts to.